Hello everybody, my name is Dan and this is my series Practicing English. And today in the afternoon, at noon, okay, I decided to practice English instead of in night. And today the weather's also hot and I feel uncomfortable right now. In the morning, I went to school to do paperwork, and it took me a lot of time. I think it's be a waste of my time. It will be a waste of my time, and I don't like this. And now, let's let practice English with chapter with the next chapter I started yesterday, last night. Okay, let's go with chapter 11, the thief of time. I'll be young and strong and beautiful forever. And so the years passed, but time did not touch the face of Dorian Gray. That wonderful beauty, the beauty that Percy Howard had painted, never left him. He enjoyed the life of a rich and fashionable young man. He studied art and music and filled his house with beautiful things from every corner of the world. But his search for pleasure did not stop there. He became hungry for evil pleasures. He became more and more in love with the beauty of his face, more and more interested in the ugliness of his soul. After a while, strange stories were heard about him, stories of a secret, more dangerous life. But when people looked at that young and good-looking face, they could not believe the evil stories, and they still came to the famous dinner at his house, where the food, the music, and the conversation were the best in London. But behind the locked door at the top of the house, the picture of Dorian Gray grew older every year. The terrible face showed the dark secrets of his life. The heavy mouth, the yellow skin, the cruel eyes, these told the real story again and again. Dorian Gray went secretly to the room and looked first at the Dorian Gray went secretly to a room and looked first at the ugly and terrible face in the picture, then at the beautiful young face that laughed back at him from the mirror. After his 25th years, the stories about him became worse. He was sometimes away from home for several days. He was seen fighting with foreign sailors in bars. He was friendly with the thieves. And in the houses of fashionable people, men sometimes turned away when he entered a room. Women's faces sometimes went white when they heard his name. But many people only laughed at this story. Dorian Gray was still a very rich and fashionable man, and the dinners at his house were excellent. People agree with Lord Henry, who once said, in his amusing way, that a good dinner was more important than a good life. As the months and the year passed, Dorian Gray grew more and more afraid of the picture. He both hated it and loved it. And he became more and more afraid that someone would discover his secret. For weeks he tried not to go near it, but he could not stay away from it for long. Sometimes he was staying with friends' houses. He suddenly left and hurried back to London. He wanted to be sure that the room was still locked and the picture was safe. One time he used to spend winters with Lord Henry in a little house in Algiers, but now he no longer traveled outside England. His fears grew stronger every year, as as time passed, the face in the picture grew slowly more terrible. Chapter 12. Hand of a Killer. Uncover the picture and you will see my soul. It was the 9th of November, the evening before his 38th birthday. Dorian Gray was walking home from Lord Henry's house when he saw Basil Hallward. He felt strangely afraid and tried to pretend that he had not seen him, but Basil hurried after him. "Dorian," he called, "what extraordinary luck! I'm catching the midnight train to Paris. I want to see you before I left. I'll be away from England for 6 months." He put his hand on Dorian's arm. "Look, we're near your house. May I come in for a moment? I have something to say to you." "Of course, but won't you miss the train?" asked Dorian lazily, as he walked up to the steps to his door. "I have plenty of time. It's only 11 o'clock. They went in and sat down by the fire. "Now, my dear Dorian, I want to speak to you seriously," Basil began. "I must tell you that people in London are saying the most terrible things about you." Dorian lit a cigarette and looked bored. "I don't want to know anything about it. It doesn't interest me." "But it must interest you, Dorian," said Basil. "Every gentleman is interested in his good name. Of course, when I looked at you, I know these stories can't be true. A man's face shows if his life is good or bad. Why does Lord Berwick leave the room when you enter it? Why does Lord Staveley say that no honest woman is safe with you? That your soldier who was your friend? That young soldier who was your friend, why did he kill himself? There was Sir Henry Ashton, who had to leave England with a bad name. And what about Lord Kent's son? What kind of life does he have now?" "Stop, Basil. I don't know what you're talking about," said Dorian coldly. "Did I teach these people how to live their lives? And the people who tell these stories, all their lives any better than mine." "Are there other stories too?" continued Basil. "Are they true? Can your life really be so bad or so evil? You were a fine young man once, but now I heard this story. I wonder, do I know you at all? What has happened to the real Dorian Gray? I think I would have to see your soul before I could answer the questions." "The real Dorian Gray?" asked Dorian quietly, his face white with fear. "Yes," said the artist sadly, "but only God can see your soul." A terrible laugh came from the younger man. "Come, Basil," he cried. "Come with me. I'll show you what only God can see." "Why not? It's your own work. You talk enough about evil. Now you must look at it." He took Basil upstairs to the locked room. Inside, he turned to the artist with the smiling lips and cold, hard eyes. "You're the one in the world who should know my secret. Are you sure that you want to?" "Yes." "Then uncover the picture, Basil, and you will see my soul." A cry of horror came from the artist when he saw the terrible face in the portrait. How could that evil and unlovely face be Dorian Gray's? But yes, it was. He went nearer to the picture. It could not be the portrait that he had painted. But yes, there was his name written in the corner. He turned and looked at Dorian Gray with the eyes of a sick man. "What does it mean?" he asked at last. "When you finish the portrait," replied Dorian Gray, "I make a wish." "I remember, yes," said Basil. "You wished that the picture could become old and that you could stay young. But this," he stared again at the picture, "this is impossible, and you told me that you destroyed the picture." "I was wrong. It has destroyed me." "My God, Dorian," cried the artist, "if it is true, if this is the face of your soul, then you are more evil than the worst of the stories about you." He sat down at the table and put his face in his hands. You must ask God for his help." "It's too late, Basil." "It's never too late, Dorian. Look at the terrible face. Look at it." Dorian turned and stared at the face in the picture, and suddenly he hated Basil more than he had ever hated anyone in his life. Basil now knew his secret and had seen the real Dorian Gray. Violent feelings burned inside Dorian. He picked up a knife from the table, then the head inside him exploded and killed, and like the wild animal, he ran towards Basil and dug the knife into the artist's neck again and again. Oh my gosh. The murdered man's head fell forwards, and the blood ran slowly across the table and down onto the floor. Dorian stood and listened. He could hear nothing, only the drip of blood onto the floor. He went to the window and looked down into the street. He felt strangely calm. The friend who had painted his portrait had gone out of his life. That was all. He locked the door behind him and went quietly downstairs. His servants were all in bed. He sat down and began to think. No one had seen Basil in Dorian's house tonight. Paris, yes, Basil had gone to Paris, of course. So it would be 6 months before people asked where he was. 6 months. That was more than enough time. Dorian walked up and down the room. Then he took out a book from his desk and began to search for a name. Alan Campbell. Yes, that was the name that he wanted. Chapter 13. The next morning, Dorian wrote 2 letters. He put one of them into his pocket, and he gave the other to his servant. "Take this to Mr. Campbell's house at once," he said. While Dorian waited, he picked up a book and tried to read. But after a time, the book fell from his hand. Perhaps Alan Campbell was out of England. Perhaps he would refuse to come. He was a very clever scientist. 5 years ago, he and Dorian had been good friends, but now Alan never smiled when he met Dorian. Each minute seemed an hour to Dorian, but at last the door opened. Dorian smiled. "Alan," he said, "thank you for coming. I never wanted to enter your house again, but your letter said that it was a question of life and death," said Alan Campbell. His voice was hard and cold. "Yes, Alan, yet it is. Please sit down." Across the table, the 2 men's eyes met. Dorian was silent for a moment. Then, very quietly, he said, "Alan, in a locked room upstairs, there is a dead body. I want you to destroy it. There must be nothing left. I know you can do it." "I don't want to know your terrible secrets. I refuse to have you," Campbell replied. "But you must, Alan. You're the only person who can help me." Dorian smiled sadly. He took a piece of paper, wrote something on it, and pushed it across the table to Carbell. As Carbell read the piece of picture, his face went white. He looked at Dorian with hate and fear in his eyes. "I'm so sorry for you, Alan," said Dorian gently. "I've already written a letter. If you don't help me, I have to send it, but I think that you will help me." Campbell put his face in his hand and was silent for a long time. Dorian waited. "I'll need some things from my house," Campbell said at last. Dorian sent his servant to fetch the things that Campbell needed, and the two men waited silently. When the servant returned, Dorian took the scientist upstairs to the locked room. As they entered, Dorian remembered that the portrait was uncovered. He turned to cover it and stopped and stared in horror. One of the hands of the picture was red with blood. For Dorian, this was more terrible than the dead body in the room. With shaking hands, he quickly covered the picture. "Leave me now," ordered Campbell. 5 hours later, Campbell came back downstairs. "I've done what you asked me to do," he said. "And now goodbye. I never want to see you again." When Campbell had left, Dorian went upstairs. There was a terrible smell in the room, but the dead body has gone. The sailor. "I'll find that man and kill him like a dog." Later, the same evening, Dorian Gray was at the party. He smiled and talked and looked as young, as good-looking as ever. But his head ached, and at dinner he could not eat anything. When Lord Henry asked him if he felt unwell, Dorian said that he was tired and would go home early. At home, he felt worse. Although the room was warm, his hands shook with cold. He wanted to forget for a while, to escape from the prison of his real life, and to lose himself in dreams. At midnight, in old dirty clothes, he left the house again, went to the East End of London. There, he knew places where he could get opium, dark, evil places where people bought and sold the beautiful and terrible dreams of opium. He had been there for many times before. He found the house that he was looking for and went into a long, low room. Men were lying on the dirty floor, and the sailor was asleep on the table, and 2 men were drinking at the bar. As Dorian hurried up the narrow stairs, the sweet, heavy smell from opium came to meet him, and he smiled in pleasure. But the room he saw a young man who had once been his friend. He turned away and went downstairs again to drink at the bar. One of the women spoke to him. "Don't talk to me," said Dorian angrily, and walked towards the door. "I remember you. You're Prince Charming, aren't you?" she shouted after him. The sleeping sailor woke up when he heard these words, and as Dorian left the house, the sailor hurried after him. Dorian walked quickly along the road, but as he reached a corner, hand closed around his neck. A man pulled him backwards and pushed him against the wall. Dorian fought quietly and pulled the hands away. Then he saw the gun in the man's hand. "What do you want?" he said quickly. "Keep quiet," said the man. "If you move, I'll shoot you." "You crazy! What have I done to you?" "To destroy the life of Sybil Vane," answered the sailor. "And Sybil Vane was my sister. She killed herself because of you. I've been looking you for years, but I only knew the name that she used to call you, Prince Charming. Well, tonight I heard your name, and tonight you're going to die." Dorian grew sick with fear. "I never knew her. I've never heard of her. You're crazy, he cried. Suddenly he had an idea. How long ago did your sister die? He asked. How long ago did your sister die? He asked. 18 years ago, James Van replied. What did you ask me? 18 years, laughed Dorian Gray. Take me to the light and look at my face. James Van stared at Dorian. Then he pushed him towards the light, and in the light he saw the face of a boy of 20. This man was too young. He was not the man who had destroyed his sister's life. My God, he cried, I nearly murdered you. Go home and put that gun away before you get into trouble, said Dorian, and he walked quickly away. James Van stared after him in horror. Then a woman's hand touched his arm. Why didn't you kill him? She asked. He's evil. He's not the man that I'm looking for, answered the sailor. The man who I want must be nearly 40 now. That the man's only a boy. A boy? The woman laughed. Her voice was hard. It's 18 years since I met Prince Charming, and his pretty face hasn't changed in all the time. It's true, I promise you. James Van ran to the corner of the road, but Dorian Gray had disappeared. A week later, Dorian Gray was at his house in the country, where he had invited Lord Henry and several other friends. Among them was a pretty Lady Monmouth, and her much older husband. Lady Monmouth was amusing and clever, and seemed to like Dorian Gray very much. One afternoon, as they laughed and talked together during tea, Dorian went out to fetch a flower for Lady Monmouth's dress. Lord Henry smiled at Lady Monmouth. I hope you're not in love with Dorian, my dear. He's very dangerous. She laughed. Oh, men are much more interesting when they're dangerous. Just then they heard the sound of a heavy fall. Lord Henry ran out of the room and found Dorian lying unconscious on the floor. When Dorian opened his eyes, Lord Henry said, My dear Dorian, you must take care of yourself. You're not well. Dorian stood up slowly. I'm all right, Harry. I'm all right. As he dressed for dinner in his room, Dorian remembered what he had seen, and cold fear ran through himself like a knife. He had seen a face watching him at the window, and he had recognized it. It was the face of James Van. The next day, he did not leave the house. In fact, for most of the day, he stayed in his room, sick with fear. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw again the sailor's face. He tried to tell himself that he had dreamed it. Yes, it was impossible. Sylvie Van's brothers did not know his name, and was probably on his ship at sea. No, of course he had not seen James Van's face at the window, but the fear stayed with him, dream or no dream. 2 days passed, and Dorian grew less afraid. One third day, a clear, bright winter morning, Dorian joined his friend on shooting party with Lady Monmouth by his side. He walked to the edge of the forest where the men were shooting at birds and small animals. The cold air and the sounds of smell of the forest filled Dorian with happiness. Suddenly, one of the men shot into the tree near them. There were two cries in the morning air, the cry of animals and the cry of man, both in pain. There were shoots and calls from the man, and then a man's body was pulled from the trees. Dorian turned away in horror, bad look seemed to follow him anywhere. People began to walk back towards the house. Lord Henry came over to tell Dorian that the men were dead. Dorian shook his head. "Oh, Henry," he said slowly, "I feel something terrible is going to happen to some of us, to me, perhaps." Lord Henry laughed at this idea. "What could happen to you, Dorian? You have everything in the world that a man can want. Forget about this accident. It was just an accident, not murder." Then he added with a smile, "But it would be very interesting to meet a person who had murdered somebody." "What a terrible thing to say," cried Lady Monmouth. "Don't you agree, Mr. Gray? Mr. Gray, are you ill again? Your face so white." Dorian smiled and tried to speak calmly. "It's nothing," he said quietly, "but please excuse me. I think I must go and lie down." Upstairs in his room, Dorian's body shook with fear, like a leaf in the wind. He felt that he could not stay another night in the house. Death walked there in the sunlight. He decided to return immediately to London and visit his daughter. His servant came to pack his clothes, and while he was doing this, he told Dorian that that man was a sailor, but no one knew his name. "A sailor?" cried Dorian. He jumped to his feet. A wild hope filled him. "I must see the body at once." He hurried to the house where the body lay, and when he uncovered the face of that dead man, he saw that it was James Van. He cried with happiness and knew that now he was safe. Okay. The last chapter, the picture, a face without a heart. "You're going to be good," said Lord Henry. "Don't tell me that. You wonderful as you are, please don't change." His long white fingers played with a flower on the table. It was spring in London, and the two friends were having dinner at Lord Harry's house. Dorian Gray shook his head. "No, Harry, I've done too many terrible things in my life. I'm going to change. I began my good life yesterday in the country." "My dear boy," smiled Lord Henry, "everybody can be good in the country. There's nothing to do in the country. So it's impossible to do anything bad. But tell me, how did you begin your good life? How did you begin your good life?" "There was a girl in a village, a very beautiful girl, an honest country girl. She loved me and was really to come away with me yesterday. But I said no. I refused to destroy her young life, and I left her as honest as I found her." Lord Henry laughed. "You left her with a broken heart, you mean? You can see how can she happy now with a country boy after he has known you?" "Don't, Harry," cried Dorian. "Can you never be serious? I'm sorry that I told you now. Let's talk about other things. What's happening in London?" "Oh, people are still discussing poor Basil and how he disappeared. I don't know why, because there are plenty of other things that they can talk about. My wife has returned away with another man, had run away with another man. Alan Campbell has killed himself." "What do you think that happened to Basil?" asked Dorian slowly. "I've no idea," answered Lord Henry. "English police report that Basil went to Paris on midnight train on the 9th of November, but the French police say he had never arrived in Paris at all. If Basil wants to hide himself, I really don't care. And if he's dead, I don't want to think about him. That's it, the only thing that really frightens me. I hate it. Harry, don't people say that? That Basil was murdered, said Dorian. Some of the newspapers say so, replied Lord Henry, but who would want to murder poor Basil? He wasn't clever enough to have enemies. What will you say, Harry, if I tell you that I murdered Basil? Asked Dorian. He watched his friend carefully. Lord Henry smiled. No, my dear Dorian, murder wouldn't please you. You like different kind of pleasure, and you should never do anything that you cannot talk about after dinner. He lifted his coffee cup. What happened to the fine portrait that Basil painted of you? I haven't seen it for years. Didn't you tell me that it was stolen? What a pity. Oh, I never really liked it, said Dorian. I prefer not to think about it. For a while, two men were silent. Then the older man lay back in his chair and looked at Dorian with half-closed eyes. Tell me how you have kept your mouth and your wonderful beauty, Dorian. You must have some secret. I'm only 10 years older than you, and I look like an old man, but you haven't changed since the day when I first met you. What a wonderful life you had. Yes, said Dorian slowly. It's been wonderful, Harry, but I'm going to change it now. You don't know everything about me. His friend smiled. You cannot change to me, Dorian. You and I will always be friends. Dorian stood up. I'm tired tonight, Harry. I must go home. I'll see you at lunch tomorrow. Good night. At the door, he stopped for a moment and looked back, but then he turned and went out without another word. At home, he thought about his conversation with Lord Henry. Could he really change, he wondered. He had lived an evil life and had destroyed other people's lives as well. Were there any hope for him? Why had he ever met that wished about the picture? He had kept his youth and beauty, but he had paid a terrible price for it. His beauty had destroyed his soul. He picked up a mirror and stared at his face. What was he now? A face without a heart. Suddenly he hated his own beauty and dropped the mirror on the floor when it broken into many small pieces. Jane Van, Basil Howard, Sylvie Van, these deaths was not important to him now. It was better not to think of the past. Nothing could change that. He must think of himself. Perhaps, he thought, if I live a better life, the picture will become less ugly. He remembered the pretty village girl. He had not destroyed her young life. He had done one good thing. Perhaps the picture had already begun to look better. He went quietly upstairs to a locked room. Yes, he would live a good life, and he need not be afraid any more of evil face of his soul. But when he uncovered the picture, he gave a cry of pain. There was no change. The face in the picture was still terrible, more hateful, if possible, than before. And the red on the hand seemed brighter, like new blood. He stared at the picture with hate and fear in his eyes. Years ago, he had loved to watch it changing and growing old. Now he could not sleep because of it. It had stolen every chance of peace or happiness from him. He must destroy it. He looked around and saw the knife that he had killed Basil Howard. And now, It will kill the artist's work, he said to himself. It will kill the past, and when that is dead, I will be free. He picked up the knife and dug it into the picture. There was a terrible cry and loud crash. The servants walked, and two gentlemen who were passing in the road below stopped and looked up at the house. A policeman came by then and asked him, "Whose house is that?" "Mr. Dorian Gray, sir," was the answer. The two gentlemen looked at each other, then turned away from the house and walked on. Inside the house, the servants talked in low, frightened voices. After some minutes, they went up to the room. They knocked, but there was no reply. They called out, they called down, nothing. They could not open the door, so they climbed down from the roof and got in through the window. Against the wall, they saw the fine portrait of young Dorian Gray, and in all his wonderful youth and beauty. Lying on the floor was a dead man with a knife in his heart. His face was old and ugly and yellow with disease. Only the rings on his fingers told them who he was. Okay. I think this is the end for today reading. Thank you for listening. This is a good story. I think I'll go to read it next time if I have time. Thank you, and until next time.